It's time for another Cutter's What If series, and this time it's about the 1985 Toronto Blue Jays. It's me, Jeff Cutter, Historical Diamond. And you may be wondering yourself, how did I arrive at the 1985 Toronto Blue Jays and the franchise in general? Well, it's simple. I am a fan of the Blue Jays, always have been, always will be. I'm from southwestern Ontario, so basically, the Blue Jays are my home base, if you will. Now, the Toronto Blue Jays in history have gone through a lot of painful changes, especially in the first 4 years of their franchise. From 77 to 81, they were just crap. But the 1981 strike, the same strike that screwed over teams like Cincinnati and St. Louis, and ruining Montreal's chances at a pennant, the Blue Jays actually got a gift. They weren't that far out of the gate after the strike. And then they started making inroads. 1982, the first time they ever were not named the division's worst team. They actually tied for last place. Then in '83, they had a playoff run that was culminating with the Royals Blue Jays game on ABC's Monday Night Baseball, in which Harry Cosell had to deal with Blue Jays mania and all that. Unfortunately, the Blue Jays would choke in a famous week in Baltimore and Detroit, practically handing over the division to the Baltimore Orioles. 1984, the Toronto Blue Jays were great. 89 wins, best in history, but the problem was they couldn't compete with the out of the gate 1984 Detroit Tigers. So the Detroit Tigers, obviously, nobody would touch them. 1985, of course, 99 wins. We'll get more into the 1985 Blue Jays in a bit. 1987, the Blue Jays had the division on the final day. A big loss on the second last Sunday of the year cost them dearly. Tom Hankey giving up that tying home run was huge because not only did the Blue Jays only have a 3.5 game lead with 7 to play, it would have been 5.5. They would have had the division wrapped up if they won. Unfortunately, the Blue Jays would see their way to losing all 7 games on the final weekend. So practically, the Blue Jays saw Detroit sneak up behind them. The final weekend, Detroit and Toronto were facing each other in Detroit at Tiger Stadium. All the Jays had to do was win 2 out of 3, or even sweep the Tigers, they win the division. If they only won 1 out of the 3, no big deal. The Blue Jays and Tigers would have played a 1-game playoff back in Toronto at Exhibition Stadium. But nothing happened. The Blue Jays ended up getting swept by the Detroit Tigers in that series, and division lost, playoff loss. Damn you to hell. The Blue Jays would come back in '89 after a surprising 12-24 start, which saw Jimmy Williams being fired and Cedar Gaston taking on the manager reins, albeit reluctantly. The Blue Jays pulled off a 10-run differential against the Boston Red Sox. They were down 10-0, but they beat the Bull Sox at Fenway Park, and Toronto actually ended up winning 13 straight games at Fenway Park at one point. That's amazing. Toronto winning that game, thank you, Ernie Witt and his grand slam in the 9th inning. However, the jewel of the 89 season would open up as the Skydome opened 2 days after that Boston game. Even though the Jays lost to Milwaukee, it signaled fan interest. And they almost pulled 3 million people to the park in not even a full season at the Skydome. So basically, what ends up happening is that the Blue Jays come out of the woodwork and are winning the division. Another surprise team, the Baltimore Orioles, who really stunk it up in 1988. After all, the Orioles did lose 21 straight games to start the season. It was Blue Jays Orioles. Who can forget? But anyway, the Blue Jays ended up winning the division on the final weekend, the second last day of the year, by beating the Baltimore Orioles on the final game of the week that NBC had done. A 40-plus year tradition ruined by greed in CBS's $1 billion contract to do baseball. So the Blue Jays would play the Oakland Athletics. There was no freaking way that the '89 Blue Jays were going to get to the World Series. Rickey Henderson was just too damn dominant. And of course, Jose Canseco, who would soon be a Blue Jay, had hit a 5th deck home run that everyone was in awe of. Oakland easily took down the San Francisco Giants in the earthquake-ravaged World Series. 1990, the Blue Jays went down to the final day. Unfortunately, a Tom Bernatsky catch, non-catch, I don't know what happened, sunk them, and the Blue Jays ended up 5 minutes later giving up a game-winning home run to Baltimore's Mickey Tettleton. The 91 Blue Jays, however, defied expectations. They went on to get Tom Candinati and Juan Guzman, someone who the Blue Jays just dismissed. Oh, and by the way, that was also the season that Pat Gillick removed the name Stan Pat because of his reluctance to make major trades in the past few years. Well, he did make a trade sending Jesse Barfield to the New York Yankees for Al Leiter and picking up Mookie Wilson for Lee Masilli. But anyhow, those 1991 Blue Jays were made by a huge trade that sent Tony Fernandez and Fred McGriff, yes, Fred McGriff used to be a Blue Jay, to the San Diego Padres for Robbie Alomar and Joe Carter. Joe Carter was an RBIs machine, over 100 plus RBIs a year. And Robbie Alomar, a great defensive second baseman, something the Blue Jays didn't really have. Sure, they had Fernandez and Alfredo Griffin, but they were both shortstops. So in a way, it was weird. But the Blue Jays, even though they were the first home team to get 4 million fans, it took them to the final week to get to the division title, and a shocking win over the California Angels and Brian Harvey, who was almost unstoppable that year in the bullpen. The Blue Jays would go on to play the Minnesota Twins in the ALCS. Unfortunately for the Jays, they ended up losing 5 games to the Twins. The Twins were just that good. Mike Pagliaro with that Game 3 home run, and Joe Carter hitting the wall and getting injured. Yikes. Now you'd be thinking, okay, 91 Blue Jays. But in a sense, I don't think the 91 Blue Jays deserve to make the final. 92 and 93 were different kettle of fish, of course. Blue Jays, everyone knows Blue Jays went on to take down Oakland, their nemesis, in 6 games, keyed by Robbie Alomar's game-tying home run in Game 4 off Dennis Eckersley, who made the stupid move of taunting the Blue Jays bench. You just cannot fucking do that. So anyway, the Toronto Blue Jays went on to facing Atlanta Braves in the World Series. You know what happens. Blue Jays get a big split in Atlanta thanks to Ed Sprague's 9th-inning home run off Josh Reardon. Blue Jays go up 3-1. They lose thanks to Lonnie Smith's grand slam. And, of course, won Game 6 in like 5 freaking hours. It was a long game that should have ended in the ninth, but the Blue Jays choked. Poor Tom Hankey, you gotta feel for him. And then the Blue Jays lose like 11 players from that 92 squad and have to rebuild in a sense. And thankfully they did, getting Paul Molitor and Dave Stewart among others. And oh yeah, Tony Fernandez came back to Toronto via the Mets. The Padres traded him to the Mets, and the Mets traded him, Tony, to the Blue Jays just for Darren Jackson. Thank goodness for that. And don't forget Derek Bell being a bit of a ham in spring training, and then they traded him to San Diego for Darren Jackson. 93 Blue Jays had such a good lineup: Whamco, W-H-A-M-C-O, White, Henderson, Alomar, Molitor, Carter, Allroot. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Blue Jays did have a little bit of difficulty against the Chi Sox in the LCS in 93, but they managed to pull it off in 6 games, and Dave Stewart still had not lost an LCS game. They took on the Philadelphia Phillies, the wily bunch that took down Atlanta, among others. How about this for drama? The Phils actually had a 5-run lead twice in Game 4 of the World Series and choked. Mitch Williams choked. Mitch Williams had death threats. Even though I was cheering for the Blue Jays, you got to feel for Mitch Williams. Why the fuck would you give stupid death threats? But the Toronto Blue Jays persevered. They got shut down by Curt Schilling, who basically had no one in the bullpen to bail him out. And Schilling pitched a perfect game in a sense. But the Blue Jays, Game 6, Joe Carter, home run off Mitch Williams, basically ending Mitch Williams' career because 2 years later he was out the league. And no, unlike Danny Moore, he survived everything and did not kill himself. Feel bad for Angels fans. Danny Moore's blown save on Dave Henderson was basically the tip of the iceberg, if you will. As we all know, the Blue Jays won the World Series. Blue Jays did not make many playoff chases until 2015 when they used a super effort. After being 50-51 to start the year, they were still in reach for first place in the division, and they pulled off a second half of wonder. Heck, they got Troy Tulowitzki, and I never anticipated that. They got David Price, a ragtag group of people, including Jose Bautista and Edwin Encarnacion, cast-offs from the Pirates and Reds, respectively, who actually pulled some rabbits out of their hats. And yes, Josh Donaldson coming to Toronto from Oakland for Brett Laurie. Yes, it was hard to see a Canadian third baseman gone, but Josh Donaldson proved it worthy and won the MVP in 2015. And that was the year the Blue Jays won the division, took on the Texas Rangers, lost the first two games of the League Division Series, and it was like curtains for them. However, they pulled back together, won games 3 and 4, and then game 5, Jose Bautista backflip. Game set match, they would take on the Kansas City Royals. And unfortunately, Kansas City used a little bit of weird voodoo in Game 6 to take down the Toronto Blue Jays. Blue Jays had runner on third with no outs. Could have tied the game. They didn't. 2016, Blue Jays get a wild card spot. They played Baltimore's wild card game at the Dome. Aaron Encarnacion hits an 11th inning home run. Game over. The Blue Jays end up beating Texas in 3 straight. Basically, Toronto in Texas in the playoffs, 4-0 at Arlington, and a weird 2-2 on home turf. Unfortunately, the 2016 team didn't really deserve it. Cleveland's bullpen was just too damn dominant, so that's why they didn't get picked. And the 2015 team, God love them so much, they deserved it against Kansas City. But there's another Toronto team that definitely deserved it against Kansas City, and that was the 1985 team. I was born April 9th, 1985. On an off day, the Blue Jays actually played their first game of the year against Kansas City in Kansas City and lost. Unfortunately, that was a bad omen. No, it wasn't. The Blue Jays, after May 6th, took first place and never relinquished it. A strike actually threatened the 1985 season. People forget that. In August, there was a player strike. Thankfully, cooler heads would prevail, and the Toronto Blue Jays would go back to work 2 days later. It was a 2-day strike. They did lose one game off the schedule against Baltimore, but they win 99-62. They actually had to fend off the New York Yankees, who were chasing the Blue Jays. Thankfully, the Blue Jays won 3 out of 4 in a critical series at Yankee Stadium. And even though Tom Henke gave up a home run to Butch Weingart and Ron Hazy, I forget which one. I think it was Weingart. The Blue Jays did win on the second last day of the season on a Saturday at home. Doyle Alexander was a hero. And, of course, Doyle Alexander was used by the Detroit Tigers to win the 1987 division for them over the Blue Jays. The price they paid, John Smoltz, who went on to a fantastic time in Atlanta. Oh, yeah, Doyle Alexander was traded to Atlanta, by the way. So anyway, the 1985 Blue Jays were solid. They had a catching platoon of Ernie Whitt and Buck Martinez. Unfortunately, that fell by the wayside in July in Seattle when Buck Martinez got bowled over by a few Seattle runners and broke his leg, and he retired after the 1985 season, starting a sports broadcasting career that's lasted over 3 decades. Heck, Buck Martinez was even the manager at one time for the Blue Jays. Bet you didn't know that. First base was Willie Upshaw. Second base was Damaso Garcia, who was volatile as fuck. Tony Fernandez at shortstop after Alfredo Griffin got traded to Oakland for some relief pitching. That really didn't work out. Third base was the platoon of Rance Mulliniks and Garth Orge. The outfield, the great outfield, the best outfield in baseball, they called it. Barfield, Bell, Mosby. They have power, they have hitting, and yes, the bullet arm outfield arms, especially Barfield, 22 runners thrown out in 1985. Fan-fucking-tastic. And yes, Al Oliver, the former Expo, was picked up in 1985, and Cliff Johnson, too, who was a tormentor of the Blue Jays for many years. Well, against the Blue Jays, if you will. Toronto's bullpen was terrible. Caldwell and Lavelle didn't do their damn jobs, and it was up to Tom Henke, a Rule 5 pick from the Texas Rangers, to actually save the day. Henke was good. And don't forget Dennis Lamp, 11-0 in relief. Bet you didn't know that. However, the Blue Jays starting rotation was pretty well done. They had a few weaknesses, but the big three of Dave Stieb, Jim Clancy, and Jimmy Key were huge. Oh, yeah, and Doyle Alexander, of course, too. But those 4 were great. Dave Stieb, the franchise. Jimmy Key, a lefty who could actually win a game. In fact, when he won a game in 1985, it was the first time in 5 years that a left-handed starter had won a game for the Blue Jays. That's true. It is fucking true. Jim Clancy was a good guy, but unfortunately he was too injury prone. And that cost him dearly. because Clancy was not on the starting rotation for the 1985 LCS. Which brings us to this stage. The 1985 Toronto Blue Jays, 99-62, second best record in the majors, 2 games behind the St. Louis Cardinals. So basically, the cutter rule is every team that does a what if is a team that has not made the final. Sure, you can say, okay, well, redo the 2016 Cleveland Indians Chicago Cubs series and see if the Indians win game 5, 6, or 7 to win the title from the Cubs. Nope, you have to be not in the finals. You have to be shocked somehow. And of course, the Toronto Blue Jays of '85 were the epitome of it. Now, here's the funny thing about the 1985 season. This was the first season that the LCS, or League Championship Series, if you will, was expanded from 5 to 7 games. All you had to do was win 3 games in the old LCS, and now you have to win 4. Some say it was because the Chicago Cubs choked a 2-0 LCS lead to the San Diego Padres, and baseball wanted to give the Cubs some kind of substance. I don't know if that's true or not. But here's the funny thing. The Toronto Blue Jays, as we all know, in '85, had a 3-1 series lead. If they were playing pre-1985 LCS rules, the Blue Jays would be in the World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. But the Royals came back to wins 5, 6, and 7. Danny Jackson pitched a great Game 5. The Blue Jays squandered a chance at Game 6. And Jim Sundberg's windblown triple in Game 7. Jim friggin' Sundberg. But the funny thing is that the thing about the 1985 LCS was that it wasn't the ALCS that was dramatic. It was the NLCS that was dramatic. Of course, we all know about Vince Coleman's knee injury that cost him for the rest of the playoffs and had Tito Landrum in, who was a pretty good hitter, but unfortunately it messed up the Cardinals' mojo. I feel bad for Vince Coleman. His speed would have given the Cardinals the '85 title. So anyway, but of course the '85 NLCS would be more legendary. You know Ozzie Smith's home run Game 5. Go crazy, folks, go crazy. If that was in a best of 5 LCS, that would be one of the greatest pennant-winning home runs of all time. Up there with Bobby Thompson and Chris Chambliss, among others. But yeah, it would have been like a top 15 play in the playoffs. I don't know where I ranked that myself, probably in 25-20. But, you know, Ozzie Smith was not over his home run. And of course, Jack Clark won Game 6. So, like many of these what ifs, is basically we have to leave things alone. Now, we are going to assume that the St. Louis Cardinals easily beat the LA Dodgers in the LCS. So, it's going to be the Toronto Blue Jays and the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1985 championship. We shall see who comes out on top. So, it's the 1985 Cardinals and the 1985 Toronto Blue Jays fighting tooth and nail. And a great lineup. So, we are using St. Louis's Game 1 World Series lineup, as you see here. And, of course, we are Vince Coleman's injury is still in play, so Vince Coleman is not in the starting lineup. The Cardinals and the Blue Jays are fighting tooth and nail. John Tudor goes for the Cardinals. Steve decides to go for the Toronto Blue Jays. Obviously, the Blue Jays winning in 6 games. Steve didn't think he had to pitch, but he will have to pitch. You see a nice lineup there of Mosby, Oliver, Barfield, Upshaw, Molnix, and all them. The Cardinals and the Blue Jays, a fantastic matchup of sorts. It takes 11 innings for the St. Louis Cardinals to win this critical game. So Game 1 goes to the Cardinals. Great job there. And nothing big happens to the 3rd inning, when we see a couple of big runs for the St. Louis Cardinals to go up against. So basically, that's how it does. And then the Cardinals basically use their bright, smart, smiley faces to lead off. And then the Blue Jays trying to keep things going, but they don't get everything going. The Cardinals tied at 2, and basically they're trying to make things a whole lot simpler. And logically, that's what happens. So they go to the 11th inning. They top of the 11th. Some big runs were put on the plate, and the Cardinals with a big time win. Terry Pendleton with a pair of RBIs. Cesar Cedeno, who's a DH, gets his money's worth. And a great job by the Cardinals. RBIs by McGee. And John Tudor actually goes 10 innings with Bill Campbell finishing things off in the 11th inning. That's kind of weird how John Tudor decided to use his prowess for everything he does. So John Tudor, Blue Jays, trying to get some work done down below. Mostly next with RBIs. We see David Steve going 8+ innings, and the Blue Jays did pretty well, but unfortunately their bullpen kind of did struggle with Caldo and Lavelle. Game 2 sees Danny Cox against Doyle Alexander. Danny Cox was the starting pitcher for Game 2 of the World Series in real life, so basically, hopefully, Cox would make the Blue Jays pay, and no, he does not make them pay. The Blue Jays stomp all over him and tie up the series at Exhibition Stadium. Al Oliver with a 2-run home run. That's not Al Oliver's thing. And Rasmussen started a rally by getting himself out of a double play. A few other major plays, as you can see there. Cardinals did come back a little bit. Jack Clark did get an RBI, so did Terry Pendleton. And then a big home run by Darryl Porter. Surprise, surprise, Darryl Porter, eh? Making it 7-4. But of course, it was too little too late. The Blue Jays stomping on everyone's feet in game number 2. Hooray for them. St. Louis actually did try to make this. They actually made it 8-7. It's like, what is going on? The Cardinals are forcing the issue, thanks to Tommy Herr, among others. Over 100 RBIs by this guy. I know he didn't really hit home runs, but he did his best. Blue Jays went into the bottom of the 9th thanks to a massive triple from Malcontent, Damaso Garcia to score Molinex. And Witt, the Toronto Blue Jays win the game 9-8. And they almost choked game 2 away. That's just not kosher. So regardless of what ends up happening, you could probably tell that things didn't look good. Cardinals, a lot of RBIs. They used Danny Cox for only 2 innings. He doesn't get much. Jeff Lottie is the GOAT, giving up those 2 innings of work. Had nothing doing. Doyle Alexander does his job, but it's down to Dennis Lamp, who saves the day for the Toronto Blue Jays. And that's how it goes. The Toronto Blue Jays using some nice RBIs and all that. You got it. You really got it. And now the Toronto Blue Jays, St. Louis Cardinals, a few changes in the lineup. Mostly out of necessity because, game 3 and all that. So, here we go. Jays and Cardinals, the Toronto Blue Jays with a big win in St. Louis. Thanks to Rasmussen again getting himself out of a double play and getting runs on the board for the Blue Jays. Now the Blue Jays do give up a few runs here and there. And the Cardinals think they have it. Unfortunately, the Blue Jays stole their power away. Jesse Barfield with a few big hits. George Bell, Rance Mullinax. The list goes on and on as the Toronto Blue Jays take down the St. Louis Cardinals on that beautiful top of the 7th inning. Top of the 5th, excuse me. So yeah, you've got to learn. You have got to learn. So the Blue Jays doing their job. See the doubles and all that. Jim Clancy, a big win. They didn't use him in the LCS. Boy, they should have used him. And Joaquin Enderhart, the volatile one, did not do his job. And that's why the Toronto Blue Jays are up 2-1 in the World Series. Game 4 is a brand new day, if you will, for the Cardinals. They go back to John Tudor. The Blue Jays decide to use Luis Leo because they don't want Dave Steve to be overtired for Game 7. So they decide to take a gamble. Up 2-1, they can't afford to take the gamble. And the gamble does not pay off as the Cardinals win in the 10th inning by a score of 1-0. It's like, what the heck are the Toronto Blue Jays doing? Nothing. They had a few opportunities to get a guy off third base. Nope. Al Stupito, if you will. So anyway, great job by the Blue Jays. So yeah, that really worked for them. It was 0-0 until the bottom of the 10th. Tom Herr with a big triple to score Ozzie Smith. So the Blue Jays choked. They had a chance to win Game 4 and go up 3-1, but no, they didn't. Not much to talk about with the hitting. It was Dennis Lamp who was the GOAT of this game. Caldwell and Lavelle had to come in for Louis Leal. Leal did okay. He did pretty well. So the Cardinals using Tudor and Bill Campbell. On to Game 5. Of course, this is a 2-3-2 format, so St. Louis hosts Game 5 of the playoffs, hopefully trying to win this series. Well, they can't win the series, but they can put Toronto on the ropes heading into Game 6. And unfortunately for the Blue Jays, they just couldn't do it. They lose 6-2. A solid game for the Toronto Blue Jays. So yeah, it is what it is. And the Cardinals, well, they used some power hitting from Jack Clark, among others. So, and Tommy Herr. So the Blue Jays are really up against it. Well, they made a few offensive waves, but that didn't work out so well. Blue Jays, a few hits here and there. Upshaw with a home run. Dave Steve came back for Game 5. He ends up being lost. Caldwell and Lavelle. And good old Bob Forsch. He wins the game for the Cardinals. On to Game 6. It's Danny Cox against Doyle Alexander. The Cardinals decide to use Cox for Game 6. Hopefully making him face his fears. And his fears would be faced against Doyle Alexander. Obviously, you don't have Steve for Game 7. You have Jim Clancy. But unfortunately, as you can see, the St. Louis Cardinals didn't need to deal with Jim Clancy. They win the game 7-3 to send the Toronto Blue Jays out. So the Cardinals would have won the World Series. Blue Jays would not have done it. And a few big hits here and there. So that's good to see. Blue Jays did have a chance for France Molnix, but it was 3-2. Unfortunately, the ninth inning ruined it. A few major hits for the St. Louis Cardinals, including a Tony Fernandez error, which he was so basically smiling about. Tito Landrum, him of the big RBIs. We all knew Tito Landrum was going to be that good. He replaced Vince Coleman in real life in the World Series and did well. He does it in this one. George Bell does hit a 2-run shot, but too little too late. As Danny Cox got back after his Game 2 debacle and won Game number 6. See the RBI totals, including the home run by Willie McGee. I say Darryl Porter should get it. He went all the way. Danny Cox did. And almost all the way for Doyle Alexander. I think he basically said, win or lose, we're going to do well and we're going to shake it. Unfortunately, the Toronto Blue Jays do suffer gravely, and this what if does not help them out. So 1-1 in the what if series for helping teams out. Peace, y'all.